In 40 minutes, 6 heartbeats were pulled back from the edge of silence. Monitors screamed. Blood pooled on tile floors. Surgeons shouted orders that collided in the air and went nowhere. Somewhere between panic and paralysis, a woman in a wrinkled ER coat moved faster than the chaos. Hands steady, eyes calculating, voice barely above a whisper. One patient stabilized, then another, then another. No cameras, no applause, just lives that refused to end. And then when the last pulse finally settled, 2 strangers stepped through the emergency doors. No badges on display, no urgency in their walk. They didn't ask for the hospital director. They didn't ask for the chief of trauma. They asked for her, not her credentials, not her department. Just one question spoken low and deliberate. "Doctor, what is your real name? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. And if you're drawn to stories where quiet strength meets impossible pressure, consider subscribing. This is one you won't forget." The night shift at St. Jude Regional Medical Center always carried a particular tension, an uneasy lull that felt like the held breath before something went wrong. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across polished floors that never truly stayed clean. The emergency department smelled of antiseptic, burnt coffee, and fatigue. Dr. Emily Carter stood near the central nurses' station, reviewing charts with quiet efficiency. Her posture was straight, but unassuming, her movements economical. She wore no visible markers of authority beyond the thin badge clipped to her coat. Emily Carter, M.D., Emergency Medicine. No titles beneath it, no decorations, just a name. Around her, the ER moved in its familiar rhythm. Nurses exchanged clipped updates. Residents hurried past, chasing instructions barked from down the hall. At the center of it all stood Dr. Richard Holloway, the hospital's trauma director, broad-shouldered, loud-voiced, and unmistakably confident. His presence filled rooms the way noise filled silence. "Where are we on bed 12? Holloway demanded, scanning a tablet without looking up. "Vital, stable," a resident answered. "Doctor," Carter flagged a possible internal bleed. Holloway waved the comment away. "Radiology already cleared it. Let's not invent problems." Emily heard the exchange. She said nothing. That was her pattern. Observe, process, act only when action mattered. To most of the staff, Dr. Carter was dependable in the background. She took extra shifts, covered gaps without complaint, never argued in meetings, never competed for spotlight cases. In a hospital that quietly rewarded volume and visibility, she was invisible by design. Some assumed she lacked ambition. Others assumed she simply didn't have the edge. Holloway, in particular, had made up his mind early. He valued command presence, decisive speech, the kind of confidence that demanded obedience. Emily's calm, measured tone didn't register as leadership to him, it registered as hesitation. "Good doctor," he once told an administrator, not bothering to lower his voice. "But she's not built for pressure. Fine for routine ER work, not for the big calls." Emily had been standing 3 feet away when he said it. She'd continued charting. Inside, though, the ER never stopped talking to her. The subtle tremor in a patient's hand, the faint delay between inhalation and response, the way panic spread faster through a room than any virus. She noticed patterns others dismissed because they didn't fit the script. That night, she felt it again. The air shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms, no shouting, just a tightening like a knot forming beneath the surface. Emily glanced at the large digital clock mounted above the nurse's station. 9:17 p.m. She was halfway through reviewing labs when the overhead speaker crackled. "Attention all ER staff. Incoming mass casualty. Multiple vehicles. Highway incident at mile marker 42. Estimated arrival 8 minutes." The room changed instantly. Chairs scraped back. Phones rang. Nurses snapped into motion. Holloway straightened, his voice rising above the din. "Clear trauma bays 1 through 6. I want surgical teams on standby. Notify OR. This is mine." Emily closed the chart in her hand and looked up. 8 minutes wasn't much time. Not for what mass casualty usually meant. She moved without waiting for instruction, helping a nurse relocate a stable patient, her mind already mapping the department, beds, staff, equipment, choke points. She'd done this before. Not here, not officially. But the muscle memory was there, humming just beneath her calm exterior. As stretchers were wheeled out and monitors repositioned, Emily caught fragments of radio chatter relayed by EMS. Multiple impacts. Possible fuel ignition. Inconsistent injuries. That last phrase made her pause. Inconsistent injuries was vague enough to be meaningless or precise enough to matter. She stepped closer to the charge nurse. "What kind of inconsistency?" Emily asked quietly. The nurse shrugged. Didn't say. Paramedics sounded shaken. Emily nodded once and turned away, her expression unchanged. But internally a calculation had begun. Highway accidents followed patterns. She'd seen enough to know that. When they didn't, it was rarely an accident. Holloway took command of the central station, assigning teams with sweeping gestures. Emily waited. When no one addressed her, she headed toward Trauma Bay 4 to prep it anyway. A nurse fell in beside her instinctively. "You want pressure bags set up?" the nurse asked. "Yes," Emily said, "and get blood warmers ready. We may need them sooner than you think." The nurse hesitated only a second before nodding. Outside, sirens grew louder. The first ambulance arrived with a scream of brakes. Doors burst open. Paramedics shouted vitals, wheeling in a man with deep lacerations across his torso, too precise. Emily noted for shattered glass alone. The second patient followed seconds later, then a third. Within moments, every trauma bay was occupied. Emily assessed her patient in seconds. Pupils reactive. Airway compromised. Blood pressure dropping faster than expected. The injury didn't match the reported mechanism. She glanced up and caught Holloway's eye across the room. "Possible chemical exposure," she said calmly. "The wound patterns don't align." Holloway barely looked at her. "Stick to your bay, Dr. Carter. We don't need speculation." Speculation. Emily returned her attention to the patient, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. She adjusted the oxygen flow, her mind racing ahead of the data on the monitor. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And whatever it was, the ER had just stepped into it, unprepared. Across the department, a monitor began to beep faster, then irregularly. Another alarm joined it, then another. Emily looked up at the clock again. 9:20 p.m. 3 minutes had passed since the alert, and the system was already starting to crack. The ER crossed an invisible threshold the moment the fourth patient arrived. Up until then, chaos had been loud, but familiar voices raised, gurneys rattling, orders shouted and repeated. Now something colder seeped in, the kind of disorder that didn't announce itself, that crept quietly into the gaps between protocols. Emily felt it before she could name it. Her patient's oxygen saturation dipped despite a clear airway. Blood pressure readings fluttered unstable in a way that didn't fit the visible injuries. She adjusted medication, watching closely, but her attention kept pulling outward toward the rhythm of the room itself. Across Trauma Bay 2, a woman in her 30s convulsed suddenly, her vitals spiraling without warning. In Bay 5, a teenage boy began bleeding internally despite clean imaging moments earlier. Nurses exchanged confused looks. Residents hesitated, flipping through mental checklists that no longer applied. "Vitals don't make sense," someone muttered. Emily glanced at the clock again. 9:24 p.m. 7 minutes since the alert. 4 minutes since the first patient hit the doors. Too fast for deterioration like this. Too synchronized. She stepped out of her bay, moving toward the central station. Holloway was mid-command, issuing sharp instructions to a surgical fellow. "We'll intubate here and ship to or Richard," Emily interrupted, her voice low but firm. The use of his first name made him turn. "What?" he snapped. "This isn't standard trauma," she said. "We're seeing systemic collapse across multiple patients. Whatever they were exposed to is interacting with blood loss. If we follow normal sequencing, we'll lose them." Holloway's jaw tightened. "You're overreaching. Focus on your assignment." Emily held his gaze for half a second longer than etiquette allowed. Then an alarm screamed from Bay 2. The woman's heart rate spiked, then plummeted. "Code blue," a nurse shouted. Everything exploded at once. Staff flooded the bay. Chest compressions began. Medication trays slammed open. Holloway rushed in, barking orders that overlapped and tangled. Emily didn't move. Instead, she watched. Not out of detachment, but because she was calculating. The woman's skin tone was wrong. Not cyanotic, not pale. Something else. A faint grayness beneath flushed skin. Emily had seen it before years ago, in a place no one here would ever know existed. She crossed the bay in 3 strides. "Stop epinephrine," Emily said sharply. Holloway whipped around. "What stop epinephrine?" she repeated. "Now, that's protocol, and it will kill her," Emily said, already reaching for another syringe. "She's not crashing from cardiac failure. She's reacting." Holloway stared at her like she'd spoken another language. "Dr. Carter," he warned, voice rising, "you do not countermand in the middle of a code." Emily met his eyes, steady as stone. "If you don't stop, she dies in 30 seconds. The room froze. Even the compressions faltered. Holloway looked around, aware suddenly of the eyes on him. The nurse performing compressions hesitated, sweat dripping down her temple. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't justify. She simply waited. Finally, Holloway cursed under his breath. "Fine. 30 seconds. That's all you get." Emily injected the alternative medication and adjusted the IV flow, her hands precise, unshaking. She monitored the screen. For 2 long heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the rhythm stabilized. A collective breath released itself from the room. The woman gasped, shallow but alive. Silence fell, not relief but shock. Holloway straightened slowly. "What did you just do?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She was already moving, heading toward Bay 5, where the teenage boy's vitals were now crashing in a mirror image of the first case. "We need to change approach across the floor," she said over her shoulder. "Now." Based on what Holloway demanded following her. "Based on the fact that this isn't blunt trauma alone," Emily replied. "It's compounded. They were exposed to something that alters clotting response under stress. Treating one without accounting for the other is killing them." "That's a theory," Holloway said. "No," Emily said quietly. "It's a pattern." She reached Bay 5 just as the boy's blood pressure bottomed out. A resident was preparing to intubate. "Hold," Emily said. The resident hesitated. "Doctor, his airway is secondary," Emily cut in. "If you intubate first, you'll trigger a cascade you won't be able to reverse." Holloway stepped forward. "You're out of line." Emily finally turned to face him fully. "Richard," she said evenly, "you can either pull me off the floor and take responsibility for every patient who crashes the same way, or you can let me work." The tension between them crackled, sharp and personal. Holloway saw it then, not arrogance, not fear, but certainty. The kind that came from having been here before when the cost of being wrong was measured in bodies. 5 minutes, he said stiffly. "If this goes south, you're done." Emily nodded once. "That's enough." What followed didn't look like normal ER medicine. Emily reorganized triage priorities on the fly, redirecting staff with clipped instructions that left no room for debate. She altered medication sequences, delayed procedures others were trained to rush toward, instructed nurses to watch for signs most textbooks barely mentioned. The effect was immediate. 1 patient stabilized. Then another. Confusion spread, but so did trust. Nurses stopped waiting for Holloway's approval and started looking to Emily instinctively. Residents mirrored her movements following without fully understanding why, only that it was working. Holloway watched it happen, a knot forming in his chest. This wasn't luck. This was experience. At 9:36 p.m., the ER should have been drowning. Instead, it was holding. Barely, but holding. Emily wiped blood from her forearm and glanced at the clock again. Her breathing remained controlled, but inside, urgency mounted. Whatever they'd been exposed to had a window, a narrow one, and it was closing. She moved toward the central station again. "We have maybe 20 minutes before systemic failure accelerates," she said to Holloway. "If we don't adjust across all 6 patients, we'll start losing them one by one." Holloway swallowed. "Who are you?" he asked, not angrily now, but quietly. Emily met his gaze. "Someone who doesn't like watching people die when it's preventable," she said. Before he could respond, a nurse ran up, breathless. "Doctor Security just called," she said. "There are federal vehicles pulling up outside. They're asking about tonight's intake." Emily felt it then, a subtle shift inside her chest. Not fear, recognition. She turned slowly toward the ambulance bay doors as distant engines idled beyond them. The past, it seemed, had found the ER, And it wasn't waiting politely. The federal vehicles remained parked outside the ambulance bay like unanswered questions. Emily didn't look at them again. Not yet. Inside the ER, the rhythm had changed. The panic was still there, how could it not be, but it was channeled now, forced into narrower lanes. Staff moved with purpose instead of noise. Orders were shorter, corrections faster. The room no longer felt like it was tearing itself apart. That alone should have unsettled Dr. Richard Holloway more than it did. Instead, he stood near the central station, arms crossed, watching Dr. Emily Carter operate as if the floor belonged to her. Nurses anticipated her needs before she spoke. Residents adjusted without argument. Even the monitors seemed to behave under her presence alarms, resolving instead of escalating. He told himself it was temporary. Crisis-induced illusion. Anyone could look decisive when the rules bent. But the clock on the wall refused to agree. 9:41 p.m. 24 minutes since the alert. 4 patients stabilized. 2 still critical. Emily moved from bay to bay, her pace measured, never rushed. She spoke quietly, forcing others to lean in, forcing them to focus. Every instruction had a reason, though she rarely explained it unless asked directly. At Bay 1, a middle-aged man began showing signs of sudden vascular collapse. A nurse instinctively reached for the standard vasopressor. Emily caught her wrist mid-motion. Not that one. The nurse froze. But his pressure, I know, Emily said. Trust me. Holloway stepped forward. We are not running experimental medicine in my ER. Emily didn't turn around. Then take over. The challenge hung in the air. Holloway opened his mouth and closed it again. Because he couldn't. He didn't understand what he was seeing well enough to counter it. And worse, part of him knew it. Emily administered an alternative treatment, adjusting dosage with microscopic precision. The man's blood pressure steadied within seconds. A murmur rippled through the bay. Holloway felt something tighten behind his ribs. Not relief. Something sharper. Loss of control. He pulled Emily aside as she stepped out into the corridor. You don't get to hijack my department, he said, voice low. Not without answers. Emily met his gaze. For the first time since the ambulances arrived, something guarded flickered in her eyes. You want answers? She asked quietly. Then stop thinking like this is a hospital problem. What else would it be? She glanced down the corridor where 2 nurses were conferring in hushed tones, their faces pale. It's an exposure problem. Deliberate or incidental, I don't know yet. But it's not random. You're saying this wasn't an accident. I'm saying accidents don't create synchronized physiological collapse across 6 unrelated patients. Holloway exhaled sharply. That's a serious claim. So is losing them because you're afraid to look outside the script. Before he could respond, a resident rushed toward them. Dr. Carter, Bay 3 is destabilizing. Heart rate erratic. Labs are back. Emily took the tablet, scanning results in seconds. There it is, she murmured. Holloway leaned in. What? She looked up. A compound catalyst. Trace amounts. It wouldn't trigger alarms unless you knew to look for it. Knew from where he pressed. Emily handed the tablet back, from places where medicine isn't practiced under ideal conditions. She turned and walked away, already issuing instructions over her shoulder. Holloway stood still, watching her go. The realization settled slowly like sediment in water. This wasn't improvisation. This was memory. At 9:47 p.m., the 5th patient stabilized. Applause threatened to break out, then died uncomfortably in people's throats. This wasn't a victory. Not yet. Everyone could feel that. Emily wiped her hands and checked the 6th bay. The youngest patient, early 20s. Multiple internal injuries. Exposure levels higher than the others. Her jaw tightened slightly. This is the hard one, she said to the nurse beside her. We're running out of margin. How much time? The nurse asked. Emily glanced at the clock. 13 minutes, she said. The nurse swallowed. Can we do it? Emily didn't answer right away. She adjusted the IV, her fingers steady. Yes, she said finally, if we don't hesitate. She worked faster now, not rushed but compressed. Every movement counted. She altered fluid ratios, adjusted oxygen delivery, bypassed a step that most doctors would never dare skip. Holloway watched from the doorway, his earlier anger replaced by something close to awe, and something closer to fear. Because every rule she broke was one he'd defended for years, and every result proved her right. At 9:56 p.m., the sixth patient's vitals began to climb back from the brink. A nurse let out a sob she hadn't realized she was holding. Emily didn't smile. She didn't relax. She stared at the monitor until the numbers held steady for a full 30 seconds. Then she stepped back. "It'll hold," she said. "For now." Silence fell across the ER. 6 patients, 40 minutes, against odds that no protocol accounted for. Holloway felt his authority drain out of him in real time. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to congratulate her, perhaps to reassert himself, but before he could, a security officer approached, face tense. "Doctor," Holloway, the officer said, glancing nervously at Emily. "There are 2 individuals insisting on speaking with her." "Who?" Holloway asked. "They won't say," the officer replied, "but they have federal credentials. High level." Emily closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. Then she opened them, expression carefully neutral. "I'll speak to them," she said. Holloway stared. "You don't get to decide that." Emily turned to him, her voice calm but unyielding. "Yes," she said, "I do." The ambulance bay doors slid open at the far end of the corridor. 2 figures stepped inside their movements, unhurried eyes scanning the ER with clinical interest. They didn't look like law enforcement. They didn't look like administrators. They looked like people who already knew what they were going to find. One of them met Emily's gaze from across the room and nodded. The 2 federal agents didn't announce themselves. They didn't raise their voices or flash badges. They simply stood near the edge of the ER, letting the room come back to them. It was a subtle assertion of control, one Emily recognized instantly. She washed her hands at the nearest sink, scrubbing longer than necessary, buying herself a few seconds to slow her breathing. When she turned, her face had settled into the neutral mask she'd perfected years ago. Dr. Carter, the taller agent, asked. "Yes," Emily replied. "We'd like a word." Privately, Holloway stepped forward before she could move. "I'm the trauma director here. Anything you need goes through me." The agent's eyes flicked to Holloway, then back to Emily. "Not this." There was no insult in the tone. Just fact. Emily nodded once. 5 minutes, she said. "I'm not leaving the floor." "That will be sufficient," the agent replied. They led her to a small consult room just off the main corridor, glass walls, partial privacy. Enough to talk, not enough to hide. As the door closed, the second agent produced a slim tablet and set it on the table. He didn't activate it yet. "We're not here about the accident," the taller agent said. "At least not directly." Emily remained standing. "Then why are you here?" "Because 6 patients arrived within a narrow window presenting a compound response pattern that shouldn't exist outside controlled environments," the agent replied. "And because you counted it without external consultation." "That's not a crime," Emily said. "No," the agent agreed. "It's a signature." The word landed heavier than anything else he could have said. Emily's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're mistaken." The second agent finally spoke, his voice quieter. "You used a triage sequence that was never published. You delayed intubation across all 6 cases and altered clotting response under hypoxic stress. That method exists in exactly 1 training pipeline." Silence filled the room. Emily exhaled slowly through her nose. People learn things in different ways. The taller agent tapped the tablet awake. A still image filled the screen, a grainy overhead view of the ER time-stamped. Emily recognized the angle immediately. Internal security footage. He swiped. Another image, then another. Each one captured her in motion, positioning a patient, adjusting equipment, redirecting staff. "This is not instinct," the agent said. "It's drilled response." Emily finally sat down. Outside the glass walls, Holloway hovered, pretending to review charts while watching every movement inside the room. Nurses whispered. The ER had quieted, but tension coiled tightly beneath the surface. "What do you want?" Emily asked. The second agent leaned forward. "We want to confirm something." Confirm what he slid, a thin folder across the table. No markings, no labels. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A name redacted, a date of birth partially obscured, and a designation that Emily hadn't seen in years. She stared at it without touching. That name doesn't exist anymore, she said. The taller agent nodded. We know. Then you have your answer. We need it from you, he replied. Out loud. Emily looked up at him. Why now? Because whatever those patients were exposed to wasn't random, he said, and the way you recognized it suggests prior operational familiarity. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. Images flickered behind her eyelids, makeshift field hospitals, air thick with smoke and antiseptic. No insignia, no flags, just people bleeding in places where help wasn't supposed to arrive in time. I don't work for you anymore, she said quietly. We're not asking you to, the second agent replied. We're asking you to help us understand what just happened. Emily considered that. Outside the room, she could see Holloway arguing with a nurse, his gestures sharp, his voice tight. Control slipping further with every passing second. She stood. I'll tell you what I can, she said, but it stays between us. The taller agent inclined his head. Of course. Emily spoke quickly, efficiently. She explained the exposure pattern, the catalyst interaction, the reason the patients had crashed in sync. She didn't speculate on origin, but she didn't need to. The agents filled in the blanks with practiced ease. When she finished, the second agent exhaled slowly. That aligns with our concerns. Then prevent it from happening again, Emily said. That's all I care about. The taller agent studied her. You always did. She met his gaze. I'm done with that life. He nodded again. Understood. They exited the consult room together. The ER seemed to hold its breath as the door opened. Holloway stepped forward immediately. What is this? He demanded. Who are you people? And why are you interfering with my department? The taller agent finally reached into his jacket and produced a badge, just long enough for Holloway to see it. Holloway's color drained. I'm going to need your cooperation, the agent said evenly. Effective immediately. For what? Holloway snapped, trying to recover. For an internal review, the agent replied. Regarding tonight's response, and prior decisions that may have endangered patient outcomes. Holloway looked at Emily, disbelief etched across his face. You did this, Emily shook her head. No, she said, you did. A heavy silence settled over the ER. The agents didn't linger. They exchanged a few quiet words with hospital security, then turned back to Emily. We'll be in touch, the second agent said. If you remember anything else. I won't, Emily replied. He smiled faintly. You always say that. They left as quietly as they'd arrived. In their wake, the ER slowly resumed motion. Monitors beeped. Gurneys rolled. Life, stubborn and relentless, continued. Holloway stood frozen for a long moment. Then he turned to Emily. I underestimated you, he said stiffly. Emily met his gaze, her expression unreadable. That was never the problem. She walked past him back toward the trauma bays where her patients lay alive because she'd trusted herself when no one else would. Behind her, Holloway stared at the floor, the weight of the night pressing down on him. And for the first time, he wondered how many other quiet strengths he'd ignored simply because they didn't announce themselves. By the time the agents disappeared beyond the ambulance bay doors, the ER had entered a strange aftershock, too calm for what it had just survived. Emily stood at the foot of the sixth patient's bed, watching the monitor like it might change its mind. Heart rate steady, blood pressure holding, oxygen saturation climbing inch by inch. The young man's chest rose and fell with mechanical consistency, and for the first time since the ambulances arrived, Emily allowed herself to breathe all the way out. 40 minutes. She didn't say it out loud, but the number echoed in her head. Not as pride, as a counting. Nurses began cleaning blood from the floors, their movements slower, now almost reverent. Residents whispered to one another, replaying moments they didn't fully understand yet, but knew they would never forget. The ER felt like a battlefield after the guns fell, silent debris everywhere, adrenaline still humming, everyone unsure what came next. Holloway remained near the central station, staring at nothing in particular. The earlier certainty in his posture had collapsed inward, replaced by something brittle. He looked smaller than he had an hour ago. Emily passed him without comment, checking vitals, adjusting IV rates, murmuring reassurances to patients who hovered between sleep and fear. To them, she was just a doctor who hadn't panicked, someone who had stayed. That was enough. At 1:02 p.m., a nurse approached her hesitantly. Dr. Carter. Administration is asking for an update. Emily nodded. Tell them all 6 are stable, critical but alive. And about the agents, tell them nothing, Emily said. That part isn't theirs. The nurse smiled faintly. Yes, ma'am. Holloway heard it, the honorific unprompted. He flinched. He followed Emily into a quieter corner near the supply rooms. You humiliated me, he said, not angrily now, but raw. Emily stopped walking. She turned slowly. No, she said. I saved your patients. He swallowed. You went around me. I went past you, Emily replied. There's a difference. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Holloway sighed. You could have told me. Emily studied his face. The lines there were deeper than before, carved by years of command and expectation. You wouldn't have listened, she said gently. He didn't deny it. They stood there for a moment longer, 2 doctors separated not by rank but by how they understood responsibility. A call light flashed down the corridor. Emily moved toward it automatically. The night, however, wasn't finished, revealing its cost. At 10:11 p.m., hospital administration convened an emergency meeting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the ER. Emily was summoned, but she arrived late, only after ensuring every patient was secure. The administrators sat stiff-backed eyes darting between her and Holloway. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and anxiety. We need a report, the chief administrator said. From both of you. Holloway opened his mouth. Emily spoke first. She laid it out plainly. No dramatics, no accusations, just facts. What she observed, what she changed, and why the standard approach would have failed. She cited data from the monitor's timestamps from the footage lab values that didn't align with protocol assumptions. The room grew quiet as she spoke. When she finished, one of the administrators cleared his throat. Why wasn't this escalated earlier? Emily met his gaze. It was. It was dismissed. Eyes shifted toward Holloway. He stiffened, then nodded once. That's accurate. The admission landed harder than any argument. The administrator leaned back slowly. There will be a review. Yes, Emily said. There should be. The meeting ended without resolution, but something fundamental had shifted. Authority no longer flowed the way it had before. Back on the floor, words spread quickly, never officially, never cleanly. Nurses compared notes. Residents replayed orders. A quiet consensus formed. When things went wrong, they would look for Emily first. She felt it in the way people made space for her without being asked. In the way questions were framed, not doubting but seeking. Emily didn't encourage it. She didn't discourage it either. Near midnight, the 6th patient stirred, eyes fluttering open. Emily was there instantly. Easy, she said softly. You're safe. The young man swallowed, his voice rough. Thought I was dead. She smiled faintly. You weren't. Who did this? He asked, confusion clouding his gaze. Emily hesitated. That's not something you need to worry about right now. He nodded weakly, trusting her without knowing why. As the night stretched on, the ER returned to its familiar grind, less dramatic, more relentless. But beneath it all, a current had shifted. Something old and rigid had cracked. Emily finished charting just before 1:00 a.m. Her hands ached now, the adrenaline long gone. She flexed her fingers, aware suddenly of how tired she was. She stepped outside through the ambulance bay doors for a breath of cool air. The federal vehicles were gone. Only the hum of distant traffic remained. For a moment she allowed herself to feel it, the weight of what had almost been lost and what had been narrowly saved. She leaned against the brick wall, eyes closed, grounding herself in the present. A memory threatened to surface, a different night, a different kind of hospital sand underfoot instead of tile. She pushed it back down. This was her life now. When she returned inside, she found a folded note on the desk near her station. No signature. They asked for your real name. Emily stared at it for a long moment. Then she folded it once and slipped it into her pocket. Some names were meant to stay buried, but not the truth. Not anymore. Morning didn't arrive so much as it leaked in thin grey light seeping through the high windows of St. Jude's emergency wing. The night shift gave way to day staff, but the ER carried a residue that refused to fade. Everyone felt it. No one said it out loud. Emily Carter finished a final chart review at 6:12 a.m. Her eyes burned not from exhaustion alone, but from restraint. She'd held herself together all night by habit, by training, but daylight had a way of loosening what darkness kept contained. As she logged out of the system, a familiar sense prickled along her spine. She wasn't alone. Two men stood near the staff entrance, dressed like administrators but moving like something else entirely. They waited without impatience, their presence understated and deliberate. Not the same agents from the night before. These were different. Dr. Carter, the older one, said, offering a polite nod. "May we speak with you?" Emily didn't ask who they were. She already knew. "Here," she asked. "Somewhere quieter," the man replied. "If possible." Emily glanced around the ER. Nurses were changing shifts. Residents were debriefing in hushed tones. Holloway stood near the board, pretending not to watch her. 5 minutes, she said. They walked together toward a service corridor rarely used during peak hours. The hum of machines faded behind them. The air smelled of cleaning solvent and stale coffee. Once inside a small break room, the older man closed the door gently. "My name is Thomas Hale," he said. "This is Mark Ellison." Ellison didn't speak. He studied Emily with a look that was more assessment than curiosity. "You're with the agency," Emily said flatly. Hale nodded. "We're here because what happened last night crossed several thresholds. I already told your colleagues everything I know." "They asked about the event," Hale said. "We're asking about you." Emily leaned back against the counter. "I'm an ER doctor," Ellison finally spoke. "You were more than that." The words hovered between them. Emily's voice remained even. "I was something else. I'm not anymore." Hale studied her carefully. "The methods you used last night were last documented in a program that officially never existed. We thought everyone connected to it was either reassigned or gone. I left," Emily said. "On my terms." "Few did," Hale replied. Silence followed. Not hostile. Heavy. Ellison slid a thin folder onto the table. Inside were copies, surveillance, stills, lab analyses, time-stamped footage from the ER. All centered on Emily. "We're not here to reactivate you," Hale said. "At least not today." Emily's jaw tightened slightly. "Then why are you here?" "Because the exposure event last night may not have been accidental," Hale said. "And the response suggests the perpetrators underestimated one variable." Emily met his gaze. "Me?" "Yes." Ellison folded his arms. "We need to know whether you recognize the compound because of prior operational exposure or because you've been monitoring something similar." Emily didn't answer immediately. She thought of the patients, of how close they'd come to slipping away, of Holloway's certainty shattering in real time, of how systems failed when pride took the place of listening. "I recognized it," she said carefully, "because it was designed to be missed." Hale's eyes sharpened. "Designed by whom?" "That's your job," Emily replied. "Mine is keeping people alive." Ellison leaned forward. "You walked away from an identity most people would kill for." "Why?" Emily met his stare without flinching. "Because medicine shouldn't belong to shadows." Another silence. This one longer. Finally, Hale closed the folder. "There will be an inquiry," he said. "Not into you, but into what was ignored before you stepped in." Emily straightened. "Then do it right." "We intend to," Hale said. "One more thing." She waited. "There may be public attention," he continued. "Questions. Rumors. The hospital won't be able to contain all of it." Emily exhaled slowly. "I don't want recognition. You may not get a choice." Ellison opened the door. "We'll be in touch." As they left, Emily remained in the break room for a moment longer, steadying herself. Her reflection in the microwave door looked unchanged. Same tired eyes, same controlled posture. But something beneath it had shifted. When she returned to the ER, she found Holloway waiting near her station. "They came back," he said quietly. "Yes," Emily replied. "What do they want?" "The truth," she said. Holloway studied her, then nodded once. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. "I built my authority on being the loudest voice in the room," he continued. "Last night proved that isn't leadership." Emily considered him. "Leadership listens," she said, "even when it's uncomfortable." He exhaled. "The review is going to be ugly." "It should be," Emily replied. People were almost lost. Holloway nodded again. "I won't fight it." The admission mattered more than any apology. Later that afternoon, a hospital-wide memo circulated carefully, worded legally cautious. It praised teamwork. It cited exceptional clinical judgment. It did not name Emily directly, but everyone knew. Nurses sought her out. Residents asked questions they'd been afraid to ask before. The culture bent not dramatically but perceptibly. Emily took no satisfaction in it. At 4:37 p.m., she received a call on her personal phone. Unknown number. She answered without speaking. Dr. Carter Hale's voice said, "One of the patients is awake. He's asking questions." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "Are you calling to warn me?" "No," Hale said. "I'm calling to tell you this won't stay buried." She opened her eyes. "Then don't let it be twisted." "I won't," Hale said. "That's a promise." The call ended. Emily stood in the hallway, phone still in her hand, as the ER moved around her. Stretchers rolled. Voices overlapped. Life pressed forward. She slipped the phone into her pocket and headed back to work. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way she always had. Quietly, and without permission. The first leak didn't come from the media. It came from inside the hospital. Emily noticed it in the smallest ways at first. The way conversations stopped when she entered a room, then restarted with careful neutrality. The way administrators suddenly remembered her name in meetings. The way a junior resident asked, half joking and half afraid, whether she'd worked somewhere unusual before St. Jude. Rumors she knew were a kind of exposure too. Invisible, uncontrolled, dangerous in their own way. By the third day after the incident, they had a shape. 6 patients saved in 40 minutes. Federal presence. An internal review. A trauma director temporarily relieved of duty pending evaluation. The facts alone were enough to unsettle people. The gaps between them invited imagination. Emily stayed focused on her work. She took shifts no one wanted. She corrected mistakes gently. She avoided the staff lounge. If she could outwork the noise, maybe it would burn itself out. It didn't. At 11:18 a.m., she was called into a closed-door meeting with hospital leadership. Not the emergency session from the night before. This one was quieter, more formal. The kind of meeting where words were chosen for how they sounded on paper. The chief administrator folded his hands on the table. "There's been an inquiry," he said, from outside. Emily nodded. "I assumed there would be. They're asking for documentation, credentials, prior experience." Emily met his gaze. "I'm licensed, board certified. My record is clean." "That's not what they're asking about," he said carefully. Silence settled. "We need to know what to say," the administrator continued. "If this becomes public." Emily leaned back in her chair. "Say the truth, that a doctor did her job. And if the truth is more complicated," Emily's eyes hardened slightly, "then it's not the hospital's truth to tell." The administrator sighed. "You put us in a difficult position." Emily leaned forward. 6 families are not planning funerals because of what I did. That should make your position very clear." The meeting ended without resolution. 2 hours later, a journalist appeared in the ER. She wasn't aggressive. She didn't push past security. She simply waited near the reception desk with a notebook and a polite smile. Her presence was enough to ripple through the department. Emily saw her before the journalist saw Emily. She turned away. By the end of the week, the story broke not with names but with insinuation. Mysterious ER doctor defies protocol in high-stakes rescue. Federal agents seen questioning hospital staff after mass casualty. Emily didn't read the articles. She didn't need to. She felt their weight in the way patients looked at her, searching her face for something extraordinary, something cinematic. She offered none of it. Then on the 5th day, the CIA asked for her real name again. This time it wasn't in private. It happened in front of witnesses. Emily was in Trauma Bay, too, adjusting a patient's IV when 2 men in dark suits entered the ER with unmistakable purpose. They didn't stop at the desk. They didn't ask permission. They walked straight toward her. The room stilled. One of them spoke clearly, evenly. "Dr. Carter." Emily straightened slowly. She didn't turn yet. "We need to verify your identity," the man continued. "For the record." Every head in the ER lifted. Emily turned to face them. "You already know who I am," she said. "We know who you are now," the man replied. "We need to know who you were." Holloway, recently reinstated but visibly altered by the review, took an involuntary step forward. "This is a hospital," he said. "You don't get to interrogate my staff." The agent glanced at him briefly. "We're not interrogating, we're clarifying." Emily felt the moment stretching thin as wire. This was the line she'd hoped not to cross. "Not here," she said. "We can't wait," the agent replied. "There are implications." Emily looked around the ER at the nurses who had trusted her without knowing why, at the residents who had followed her lead without explanation, at the patients who had lived because of it. She exhaled, slowly. "My real name," she said quietly, "is not relevant to what happened here. It's relevant to accountability," the agent replied. Emily's eyes sharpened. Accountability for whom the agent hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. "You're looking in the wrong direction," Emily said. "Whatever that compound was, it didn't walk into the ER by accident. I treated the outcome. I didn't create the cause." The agent studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He nodded. "We'll continue this elsewhere," he said. "But understand this, your anonymity can't be guaranteed anymore." Emily met his gaze. "I never asked for it." The agents left as abruptly as they'd arrived. The ER exhaled as one. Holloway turned to her. "You okay?" Emily nodded. "I will be." Later that night, Emily sat alone in her apartment, the city humming faintly beyond the windows. She opened a drawer she rarely touched and removed a sealed envelope. Inside were fragments of a life she'd put away. Documents stripped of identifiers, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, a photograph taken somewhere that no longer existed. She stared at it for a long time. Then she slid it back into the drawer and closed it. Whatever came next would not be decided by who she used to be. It would be decided by what she chose to protect now. And if the truth had to surface to stop something worse from happening again, she would face it. Not as an asset, not as a ghost, but as a doctor who refused to look away. The consequences arrived quietly, wrapped in procedure, buried in paperwork, and disguised as routine oversight. Emily felt them before she saw them. Her access logs were audited. Her past employment history was re-verified. A compliance officer asked with forced casualness whether she'd ever practiced medicine outside the continental United States. The questions were polite, careful, designed to sound harmless. They weren't. At 730A, on the 8th day after the incident, Emily was summoned again, this time not by hospital administration, but by a joint review panel assembled in a conference room 2 floors above the ER. Frosted glass. No windows. A room built for decisions that weren't meant to be public. 3 people waited inside. A senior hospital legal advisor, a representative from the Department of Health, and Thomas Hale. Hale stood when she entered. The others remained seated. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Carter," the legal advisor said. "This is a formality." Emily took a seat. "Formalities have consequences." The advisor smiled thinly. "That depends." Hale watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "We've reviewed the footage," the department representative began. "Your actions deviated from established protocol." "Yes," Emily said. "They saved 6 lives. No one is disputing the outcome," the man replied. "But deviation requires justification." Emily folded her hands on the table. "I justified it in real time. And afterward, in writing," the legal advisor cleared her throat. "The concern isn't competence. It's disclosure." Emily's eyes flicked to Hale. "Disclosure of what?" "Of experience that may exceed what this institution and the public believes it understands," the advisor said. Hale finally spoke. "They're worried about precedent." Emily laughed softly. Not in amusement, but disbelief. "Precedent," she echoed. "You're worried that a doctor making the right call under pressure sets a dangerous example." "They're worried," Hale said carefully, "that the narrative shifts away from systems and toward individuals." Emily leaned back. Systems failed that night. Silence followed. The department representative adjusted his papers. "There is also the matter of the compound." Emily's posture changed subtly but unmistakably. "What about it? It matches a formulation under investigation," he said. "A delivery method consistent with targeted testing." Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. "You think someone used civilians as a field test," she said flatly. "We think it's possible," he replied, "and that whoever did it didn't anticipate a response like yours." Hale met her gaze. "They didn't account for you." Emily absorbed that slowly. "And now?" she asked. "Now, the legal advisor said we need to determine whether your prior affiliations complicate this hospital's position." Emily's voice sharpened. "My prior affiliations are classified and irrelevant. They're relevant if they invite scrutiny," the advisor countered. Hale interjected firm. "She is not the liability here." All eyes turned to him. "The exposure event is," he continued, "and so is the chain of dismissal that nearly killed 6 people." The department representative frowned. "Are you suggesting I'm suggesting accountability?" Hale said. "Not scapegoating." Emily watched him surprised. He hadn't promised to protect her, only the truth. The legal advisor exhaled. "This will escalate." "It should," Emily said. The meeting ended without resolution, but outside that room consequences moved faster. An internal memo circulated by noon. Holloway's reinstatement was rescinded this time indefinitely. A formal inquiry into leadership decision-making was announced. Training protocols were frozen pending review. And Emily was placed on administrative leave. The email arrived while she was charting. No explanation, just a request to step away from patient care temporarily. She read it once, then again. A nurse noticed her expression. "Dr. Carter," Emily stood. "I need you to cover my bay." "What? Why? Just do it," Emily said gently. Word spread quickly. Anger followed it. "This is wrong," a resident snapped. "She's the reason." "Enough," Emily said, raising a hand. "This isn't your fight." She gathered her things slowly, deliberately. When she reached the exit, she found Holloway waiting. "They benched you," he said, voice tight. "Yes, for saving lives. For making people uncomfortable," Emily corrected. He shook his head. "This hospital doesn't deserve you." Emily met his eyes. "Hospitals don't deserve people. People deserve hospitals that listen." That afternoon, Hale called her. "They're circling," he said without preamble. "I expected that. They want a name," he continued. "Something to anchor the story." Emily stared out her apartment window at the city below. "And if I give it to them, then the narrative changes," Hale said. "You stop being an inconvenience and start being an explanation." Emily closed her eyes. 6 patients, she said quietly. "How are they all stable?" Hale replied. "One's already been discharged." "That's good." A pause. "They also want to know if you'll testify," he added. Emily opened her eyes. "Against whom?" "Against a system that ignored you," Hale said, "and a chain of decisions that allowed this exposure to happen unchecked." Emily considered the weight of that. Testifying would mean visibility, scrutiny, the end of anonymity she'd protected for years. It would also mean leverage. When she asked, "Soon," Emily nodded slowly. "Then they'll get what they asked for." "Your real name?" Hale asked. Emily exhaled. "Not just my name." She turned from the window, her reflection staring back at her older, now sharper. "They'll get the truth," she said, "and they can decide what to do with it." Hale was silent for a moment. "Be careful," he said finally. Emily smiled faintly. "I always am." The line went dead. Emily sat alone in the quiet apartment, the hum of the city steady beyond the glass. She reached into the drawer again, this time pulling out the envelope without hesitation. Some truths were dangerous when buried. Others were dangerous when ignored. And Emily Carter was done letting either happen. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, which felt deliberate. Emily noticed that immediately. Tuesdays were quiet in Washington. No breaking weekend scandals. No Friday news dumps. A day designed for attention without spectacle. The kind of day institutions chose when they wanted the record to be clean, even if the truth was not. She arrived early, dressed, simply carrying nothing but a thin folder and the weight of everything she'd chosen not to become. The room was not a courtroom. It didn't need to be. There were no flags, no raised benches. Just a long table, a row of microphones, and a handful of people whose power came not from volume but from permanence. Hale sat 2 seats down from her, unreadable as ever. Across the table, representatives from the Department of Health, hospital oversight committees, and one man Emily recognized immediately, even though she had never met him. He had the posture of someone used to being obeyed without introduction. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Dr. Carter, thank you for appearing voluntarily." Emily nodded. "I'm here because people were hurt." And saved, the chairwoman said. Yes, Emily replied. After they were ignored, a ripple passed through the room. The questions began predictably. Education, certification, employment history up to a point. Emily answered calmly, precisely, never offering more than was asked. Then the man with the posture spoke. You've practiced medicine under conditions most physicians never will, he said. Is that correct? Yes. Conditions outside the United States? Yes. Conditions involving non-traditional triage, exposure response, and mass casualty scenarios? Yes. He leaned forward slightly. Under whose authority? The room stilled. Emily met his gaze. Under my own. A murmur followed. The chairwoman raised a hand. Doctor, we need clarity. Were you operating under any agency directive at the time of the incident? No. Were you trained by an agency? Emily paused. This was the moment Hale had warned her about, the hinge on which everything turned. Yes, she said. The word landed cleanly. No embellishment, no apology. The man nodded slowly. Which agency? Emily took a breath, not to steady herself, but to mark the moment. I was trained in a joint medical operations program under federal authority, she said. Its purpose was to keep people alive in places where systems had failed. Is that program still active? The chairwoman asked. I don't know, Emily replied. And I don't care. That drew a few raised eyebrows. What I care about, Emily continued, is that 6 civilians were exposed to a compound that caused synchronized physiological collapse. That this exposure was dismissed as coincidence, and that protocol nearly killed them. A representative leaned forward. Are you suggesting intent? I'm suggesting negligence at best, Emily said, and willful blindness at worst. The man with the posture interjected. And your hospital, Emily didn't hesitate, was more concerned with hierarchy than outcomes. Hale shifted slightly but said nothing. The chairwoman folded her hands. You're asking us to accept that your deviation from protocol was justified. I'm not asking, Emily said quietly. I'm stating. Silence pressed in. Then Hale spoke. She documented every decision, he said, in real time, with physiological rationale. Independent review confirms her assessment. The man frowned. Independent, yes, Hale replied, from agencies that don't answer to hospital boards. The chairwoman exhaled slowly. This will have consequences. Emily nodded. It should. The hearing recessed 2 hours later. No verdict, no statement. Just an understanding that something had shifted. Outside the building, cameras waited, but Emily avoided them. She took the long way out, exiting through a side corridor that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. Her phone buzzed as she reached the street. Unknown number, she answered. They're moving, Hale said, quietly, but decisively. Good. They're reopening the exposure investigation. Emily closed her eyes briefly. And the hospital leadership changes, Hale replied, effective immediately. Emily leaned against the cool stone wall of the building. The city moved around her indifferent. What about me? She asked. A pause. They're offering reinstatement, Hale said, with conditions. Emily smiled faintly. Of course they are. They want you back in the ER, he continued. But they also want access, consultation rights. Emily's smile faded. No, I thought you'd say that. I'll treat patients, Emily said. I won't become an exhibit. Hale exhaled. Then there may be resistance. Let them resist, Emily replied. I didn't do this for approval. She hung up and stood there for a moment longer, letting the noise of the city wash over her. That evening she returned to St. Jude not as staff, but as a visitor. She walked the halls quietly unnoticed until she reached the ICU. One of the 6 patients, the young man was sitting up, color back in his face. He smiled when he saw her. They said you might come, he said. Emily stepped closer. How are you feeling? Alive, he replied. Mostly thanks to you. She shook her head gently. Thanks to a lot of people. He studied her. They say you're different. Emily met his gaze. I'm just a doctor. He smiled. That's enough. As she left the hospital, night settling in around her, Emily felt something she hadn't in years. Not relief. Resolution. The system hadn't fixed itself. Not yet. But it had cracked. and cracks let light in. The official call came 3 days later, just after dawn. Emily was awake, already seated at her small kitchen table with a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. Sleep had been light and fractured since the hearing, not from fear but from anticipation. When the phone vibrated, she answered without checking the number. "They've agreed to your terms," Hale said. Emily closed her eyes. "Which terms? No consulting role, no access to your past, no public disclosure beyond what's already surfaced," he replied. "You return as an ER, attending, full authority." And he hesitated. Independent clinical discretion during mass casualty events. Emily exhaled slowly. "Put it in writing." "It already is." She nodded once. "Then I'll be there tomorrow." After the call ended, Emily sat quietly listening to the city wake up around her. She expected something: relief, triumph, even anger, but what she felt was steadiness. A sense of alignment she hadn't realized she'd been missing. St. Jude Regional Medical Center didn't announce her return. There were no memos, no press releases. But the ER noticed. When Emily walked through the doors the next morning, the nurse at the desk looked up and smiled, not brightly, not awkwardly, just with relief. "Good to have you back, Dr. Carter." Emily nodded. "Good to be back." The floor felt familiar under her feet, the hum of machines like a second heartbeat. She checked the board, took a breath, and stepped into motion, as if she'd never left. Holloway wasn't there. His office was empty, his name removed from the board. In his place stood a younger interim director, quiet, observant, and notably absent during the chaos of the previous weeks. He approached Emily carefully, as if unsure where to place his words. "I want you to know," he said, "we're changing how decisions get made here." Emily studied him. "Then listen more than you speak." He nodded. "I intend to." That was enough. The shift passed without drama. No mass casualty. No federal agents. Just medicine, messy, relentless, human. Emily thrived in it. She always had. Near the end of the shift, she was called into a private office. Hale was waiting inside, not alone this time. A third man stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. Older, sharper, the kind of presence that compressed the room without trying. Emily recognized him from the hearing. "I won't take much of your time," the man said, turning. "You can call me Director Wells." Emily didn't offer a title in return. "What do you want?" Wells smiled faintly. "Directness. I appreciate that." He gestured to the chair across from him. Emily remained standing. "We've concluded the investigation into the exposure event," Wells continued. "It was a field test. Unauthorized. Compartmentalized. The people responsible believed the environment would obscure accountability." Emily's eyes hardened. "It almost did." "Yes," Wells said. "Until you intervened." Silence settled. "We're shutting the program down," Wells continued. "Every thread connected to it." Emily held his gaze. "Good. There's something else," he added. "Your name." Emily didn't react. "It's already circulating in certain circles," Wells said. "Not publicly, but enough." Emily tilted her head. And we want to ensure it doesn't follow you," he said. "You'll be protected." Emily considered that for a long moment. "I don't need protection," she said. "I need distance." Wells nodded. "You'll have it." Hale finally spoke. "This is as clean an ending as you're likely to get." Emily met Wells's gaze again. "Then let it end." Wells extended his hand. Emily looked at it, then shook it once firmly. As they left, Hale paused in the doorway. "You could have taken more." Emily smiled faintly. "I took what mattered." That night, Emily walked the ER one last time before heading home. She stopped at the nurse's station, listening to the quiet rhythm of the place she'd fought to protect. A young nurse approached her hesitantly. "Doctor." "Carter, yes, I just wanted to say thank you for not letting them silence you." Emily met her eyes. "Never let anyone convince you that silence is the same as calm." The nurse nodded, absorbing the words like something precious. As Emily stepped outside into the cool night air, she felt the past finally loosen its grip. Not erased, not forgiven, but settled. She didn't look back at the hospital. She didn't need to. Tomorrow there would be patience, and that was enough. The ER at St. Jude never became quiet again. It became different. Emily noticed it in the pauses before decisions, the half-second where nurses looked to one another, then to her, not for permission but for alignment. She noticed it in the way residents framed their questions, no longer trying to impress, only trying to understand. Even the air felt altered, as if the department itself had learned something it couldn't unlearn. Authority no longer announced itself. It listened. 2 weeks after her return, the hospital implemented revised triage protocols. Not revolutionary, not flashy, just honest. Layers were flattened. Junior staff were empowered to speak without fear of reprimand. Escalation no longer meant shouting, it meant clarity. Emily's name appeared nowhere in the official documents. She didn't ask for it to be added. Recognition, she had learned long ago, was a tool, and tools could be misused. Late one evening, just before the end of her shift, an alert came in, not catastrophic, but close enough to stir old instincts. A construction accident downtown. Multiple injuries. Unknown exposure risk. The ER shifted immediately. Emily stood at the central station, hands resting lightly on the counter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't issue sweeping commands. She simply said, "Let's slow this down and do it right." And they did. Patients were stabilized. No unnecessary escalation. No ego-driven shortcuts. The system held not because it was perfect, but because it was aware. Holloway's absence still lingered like a shadow that had finally moved on. Emily thought of him once briefly, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He had been a product of the same system she had survived. The difference was that she had learned when to let go of control. He hadn't. Near midnight, Emily stepped outside the ambulance bay for a breath of air. The city lights blurred slightly, fatigue settling into her bones in a way that felt earned. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "One of the families asked about you." Emily stared at the screen. She typed back, "Tell them their loved ones did the hard part." A moment passed. They said thank you anyway. Emily slipped the phone into her pocket. Inside, a nurse waved her over. "Dr. Carter, bed 7 wants to see you before you go." Emily nodded and headed down the corridor. The patient was an older woman, bruised but alert. She smiled when Emily entered. They said, "You're the one who kept everyone calm," the woman said. Emily pulled a chair closer. "A lot of people did that." The woman shook her head. "No, you did it without making it about yourself." Emily felt something tighten in her chest, not pain but recognition. "That matters," the woman continued. "In places like this." Emily met her gaze. It should. When Emily finally left the hospital that night, dawn was just beginning to edge over the horizon. She paused at the exit, not out of sentiment but out of habit, taking stock, closing the loop. She thought of the 6 patients, of 40 minutes that could have gone another way, of a name that had once meant survival in places no one would ever map, and of the quiet truth she carried now. That identity was not what you were called when the world was watching. It was what you chose to be when no one was. Emily walked into the morning without looking back. She had nothing left to prove, only work left to do. Sometimes the most important lesson in life doesn't arrive with applause or recognition. It arrives quietly, often in moments when everything around you is falling apart. This story reminds us that true strength is not about being the loudest voice in the room, wearing the highest title, or demanding authority. Real strength is staying calm when others panic. It's choosing responsibility over ego. It's doing the right thing even when no one is watching, and especially when the system around you doesn't listen. In real life, we often underestimate people who don't seek attention. We overlook the quiet ones, the ones who work without praise, who carry heavy experience in silence, who step forward only when it truly matters. But history, both personal and collective, is shaped by these moments, by individuals who act with integrity under pressure, even when it costs them comfort, recognition, or safety. Another powerful lesson is this: justice doesn't always come instantly, but truth has a way of surfacing. When courage meets persistence, systems can change, respect can be earned, and lives, literal or emotional, can be saved. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been underestimated, or witnessed someone do the right thing while others doubted them? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it today. And if you believe in stories that honor quiet courage, hidden strength, and real human values, Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. More powerful stories are coming, and you're part of this journey.